Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel and hopefully, fingers crossed, there won't be a lot of noise on this video because of course the time that I was able to find to record a video is the time that all the neighbors decided to do yard work, mow their lawns, get their weed whackers out, dogs barking, birds dive bombing. So we'll see how this goes. But hopefully it seems to have calmed down a little bit now, so hopefully it'll stay that way for the duration of this video. We'll see. Good luck me. um, Today's video, I do want to finally talk about the Star Wars books. We're gonna do a Star Wars, and I'm gonna go through some of them. I will say apologies again for sort of being a little bit off kilter, slow with my videos. I've also slowed down a little bit on my reading and such, because I finally started playing Baldur's Gate 3 with my best friend. They finally convinced me to bite the bullet and get started on that. That's quite a time commitment. We try to play at least once or twice a week for a few hours at a time. So yeah, that's cutting into my free time. That's something else that's cutting into my free time. So the videos might be back down to like one a week for a bit, while I'm in the midst of experiencing BG3. We'll see how that goes. I'm having a really good time with it so far. I really enjoy the world and the characters. It's great. But yeah, so videos might be a little bit slow again, but that's okay. My reading is slowing down as I expected it would. It usually does around the summertime because I get busy with other things. It's totally fine. I'm also planning a trip in June, so I'm gonna be out of town for a while, so the videos might be a little bit more erratic, but I'm still definitely gonna keep up with it as much as possible, and continue to talk about my reading. And today I'm definitely gonna be talking about a lot of books, a lot of Star Wars books. So yeah, I did have somebody ask me about Star Wars books and if I had any recommendations, and boy, do I. I have so many recommendations. I have a lot to talk about with Star Wars books. There are a lot of Star Wars books that exist. Star Wars books have existed, Star Wars tie-in novels and comics and other tie-ins of various sorts have existed for as pretty much as long as Star Wars itself has existed. So since like the late 70s, early 80s. I will say I am in this video only going to talk about obviously books that I have read. I have only read the current, all of the Star Wars books that I have read are part of the current Disney-owned, quote-unquote, canon books. So anything written before the Disney purchase, so anything written before approximately 2013, 2014, is officially no longer considered part of the quote-unquote canon timeline. These have been rebranded as Star Wars Legends novels, so they still put them out. They still publish new editions of them, and new printings of them, but they're published under the auspices of Star Wars Legends, and they're no longer considered part of the canon timeline. I have not read any of those books. All of the books that I have read that are Star Wars are part of the current Disney-owned canon timeline. So I cannot speak to anything from Legends or what some people may call like the old extended universe. I can't speak to anything from that because I haven't read any of it. But I have read quite a number of new Star Wars Disney canon novels. I've read adult, young adult, and even some middle grade Star Wars novels. I think in total I've read something like 50 or a little over 50. I have not by any means read all of the ones that are out, that are currently out and currently part of the canon timeline. And I've definitely not read all of the comics. I've read some of the comics, but not very many, so I'm probably not going to talk much about the comics. But there are also a lot of Star Wars comics that exist, and Some of them are definitely very good and worth your time as well. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to try not to talk about like all of them because like I said, I've read like 50 or more, like a little over 50 Star Wars books in total, I think. That's a lot. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of them in one video. I'm just going to try to hit some of the highlights. So I do have a large, relatively large stack of Star Wars books sitting next to me that I want to dig into. So I think like first and foremost, like probably the most common question that I see from people just like on the internet, on social media is like, I like Star Wars. I maybe want to start reading Star Wars books. Where's a good place to start with Star Wars books, right? Like, what's a good place to start? I think there's a number of different answers to this. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can go with it. I think in general, you know, good places to start are any Star Wars books that don't sort of require a lot of extensive foreknowledge or extensive, detailed in-universe knowledge of like weird side stuff or lots of extensive world building, lore things. So anything that doesn't require that sort of stuff, I think is probably a good entry point to Star Wars books. It also, though, is always going to depend on like what parts of Star Wars you like best. Because there's stuff that ties into many different parts of Star Wars. And so that can also affect like what the best choice is for you to like start reading Star Wars. So I do have a couple of ideas, options, thoughts on this. I would say probably like the book that I see sort of recommended most commonly as a starter book for someone to get into Star Wars books and reading Star Wars stuff, and I kind of have to agree with it, is this one. This is Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. Yeah, this is, in a lot of ways, this really does embody like the sort of the ideal, it's almost sort of the platonic ideal of the Star Wars book for someone who wants to start reading Star Wars books but doesn't know where to start, because this is literally just this is actually a YA novel, first of all, but this is quite literally just a retelling of the original Star Wars trilogy from the perspective of two young people who are in love with each other. And they both, they join the, they start, the Imperial, at the Imperial Academy, and then one of them defects to the rebellion and the other stays with the Empire, and so it becomes almost a kind of star-crossed lovers, almost sort of Romeo and Juliet. They're on opposite sides of the war and they're in love with each other kind of situation, and it covers the events of the original trilogy, but just from the perspective of these two characters. Yeah, Sienna and Thane are their names, and it's super fun. It's definitely sort of it's as close to like a romance as Star Wars is pretty much ever gonna get. But yeah, it's really good. It's really well written. A lot of people will name Claudia Gray as one of their favorite, if not their absolute favorite, authors who writes a lot of Star Wars stuff, and that is with very good reason. She's a very good writer. This book is excellent, and I definitely recommend it, and it is a really good place to start if you're that person who likes the Star Wars movies, maybe doesn't have a lot of other you've watched the Star Wars movies, but you probably haven't watched much else. Like you maybe watched some of The Mandalorian, and that's about it. But you want to sort of maybe try to dip your toes into reading Star Wars books. This is a really good place to start because, like I said, it doesn't require any sort of extensive knowledge about extended universe stuff. It is literally just the story of the original trilogy, retold through this sort of YA romance. So it's super fun and super easy to read. Like I said, it's YA. It's very well written, so I highly recommend Lost Stars. Another potentially interesting place to start. Again, if you're just kind of like, I like the movies and I just sort of want some stuff, especially if you're like an original trilogy girly. There's some short story collections that have been coming out the past several years, called From a Certain Point of View. So this is, they did one of these for each of the original trilogy films. This is for the original Star Wars: A New Hope. And these are short story collections celebrating the 40th anniversary of each of these, of the release of each of the films. And these are literally stories that are like different scenes and points of view from the movie itself, rewritten from the perspective of like minor characters, background characters. So like, for instance, in this collection, there's a story from the sort of the eyeball stocky thing in the trash compactor. There's a story from the perspective of that alien in this book, right? So that's the kind of thing that you get in the From a Certain Point of View stories. There's a lot of really, really good authors who've written short stories in these collections. Like Pierce Brown, Delilah Dawson, Alexander Freed, a number of authors who have written numerous Star Wars books, but also like Griffin McElroy, Ken Liu. Ken Liu has written some short stories for Star Wars. That's insane, frankly. Nnedi Okorafor, Greg Rucka, so like, Will Wheaton wrote a story in this book. So there's some really great and interesting up-and-coming writers who've written stories for these collections, and they're very good and they're very accessible, and they really cover the gamut of everything you could possibly imagine, frankly. They're tragic, they're funny, they're dramatic, they're silly. It's a little bit of everything. So this is so I think these are also like really good samplers. Also, I think this is a good point at which to plug Star Wars audiobooks, because the audiobook versions of these are also extremely good. I would say all Star Wars audiobooks are really good. If you are at all into audiobooks, oh man, I just bumped my stand. If you are at all into audiobooks, Star Wars audiobooks are all quite good. The production values on them are very high. Even just a normal audiobook will almost always include sound effects, musical cues, interesting little audio moments. They do the lightsaber sounds, they do the klaxon noises, they do the whoosh of the doors opening and closing, they do they often have original John Williams music in them. So they're really good. And so like any of these books is honestly going to be a good time on audio as well as in print. So those are some good ones. If you're more of a sequel girly, another good intro might be Star Wars Resistance Reborn. This is by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is another one where it's also like if you're just into speculative fiction and you're obviously familiar with Rebecca Roanhorse, who's written a number of sort of urban fantasy and high fantasy stuff, and is a pretty popular author outside of the Star Wars world. She wrote a Star Wars novel, and this is set between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. So again, if you're a sequel trilogy girly, if you really like Finn Poe as a pairing, there's a lot of good Finn Poe stuff in here. This is a really good book, and it's super fun. And again, it doesn't require any sort of outside knowledge beyond just the movies to really get into this, right? So this is good. If you, for instance, have watched some of the Mandalorian stuff and the Ahsoka television show, and you want to know more about that, even if you haven't watched Clone Wars, though admittedly, I think really if you want to know more about Ahsoka, you kind of just have to watch the Clone Wars. But also, if you want to dive into more Ahsoka stuff, there is a YA novel about Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston. She's written a lot of YA Star Wars stuff that's pretty fun if you're into that kind of thing, if you're into these characters. But yeah, this Ahsoka book is, I don't think it completely matches up with the stuff in the Ahsoka TV show necessarily, or some of the other stuff that we've seen on television with Ahsoka, but it is a good book. I enjoyed it. So there's this too. Yeah, so that's sort of the books that you should read if you like just watch the movies and you just kind of want to dip your toes into Star Wars. Also, if you're a prequel girly, E.K. Johnston has written an entire YA trilogy about Padme. So if you're a prequel girly, you like Padme, this is Queen Shadow. It's the first one in the trilogy. It's pretty good. It's mostly, I would say it's mostly a character study. It's more of a character study than it is like a heavy plot thing, but it's pretty good, and I do really like the characterization of Padme in these books. So that's super fun. But yeah, Claudia Gray is generally considered to be like one of the best, if not the best, and also one of the most prolific writers in the Star Wars oeuvre, I guess. She's written a lot in the Star Wars oeuvre, apart from Lost Stars, which I already mentioned. She's written a couple of really good books about Princess Leia. So if you're into Princess Leia at all, she's written This is Leia, Princess of Alderaan, which is a YA coming-of-age novel about teenage Princess Leia. This is really excellent. And personally, my favorite of her Leia books is this one, which is Bloodline. This one is set sometime during the New Republic time period, vaguely several years before The Force Awakens, when Leia's a little bit older and she is a senator in the New Republic. And a lot of it is about her sort of reckoning with the fact that she's Darth Vader's biological daughter, and also with the sort of the political and social ramifications of that potentially becoming more widely known to the people of the New Republic, that Leia is the daughter of Darth Vader. But it's it's very much about sort of her relationship with that, and her sort of grappling with, and with her sort of struggling with her self-identity and her understanding of herself and her ideals and her morals and who she is as a person, on the understanding that she is in fact Darth Vader's kid, right? And so it's really great books, really good insight into Leia's mindset in the lead up to The Force Awakens and the sequel trilogy. So yeah, I really love this book. She's written a couple of other books that I really like, but I don't want to talk about all of them because I don't have time to talk about all of them. But they're all really good. Anything, like, if you pick up any Star Wars book by Claudia Gray, I'll probably mention at least one more that she's written, but if you pick up any Star Wars book by Claudia Gray, you're probably going to be in for a good time. Like, these are all quite good. I will say, I feel like I need to mention here the Aftermath trilogy by Chuck Wendig. I'm sure some people would say the Aftermath trilogy is a trilogy of novels. It's one of the earlier series of novels that's part of the new Disney canon, and it's explicitly set up as it's a post Return of the Jedi trilogy of novels. So yeah, it's set in the aftermath of the Battle of Endor, and I've read it, and I'm not saying I'm recommending it because I honestly don't like it. Not for any like story or character reasons. There's actually some really interesting characters in it, which is why I feel like I have to talk about it a little bit, because personally, I just really don't like Chuck Wendig's prose. I don't like his writing. I think his writing is bad. I don't think he's a good writer. I've never enjoyed his writing. I've tried to read things that he's written and it's never worked for me. His prose is just, I can't do it. Like, it's not, I just can't deal with it. It's not good. I can't handle it. I managed to get through the Aftermath trilogy by listening to the audiobooks. They're a little bit better on audio for me. I was able to deal with them enough on audio that I was able to get through it, because I did really want to get through it because it is an interesting story and there's some interesting characters in the Aftermath trilogy that I enjoy. But yeah, it's a slog for me because that prose, Chuck Wendig's prose, just absolutely does not work for me at all. But again, I feel like I have to talk about Aftermath, or at least mention it, because it is like a relatively significant set of books set in the post Return of the Jedi era. And I'm sure a lot of people probably do enjoy it. Again, if you can stand Chuck Wendig's prose, if you like his prose, then you're probably going to love the Aftermath trilogy. I had serious problems with it. My cat also has opinions about Chuck Wendig's Aftermath trilogy. That said, though, you know, yeah, there's some really good characters in the Aftermath trilogy. Like, I have to give you that. Like, there are some really good characters in there. I would say another writer who, you know, has done some really good stuff in Star Wars, the Star Wars oeuvre, is Daniel Jose Older. He's written a fair amount in the High Republic, in the High Republic era. I apologize. I have no idea what's going on outside. There's a lot of banging around and dogs barking and stuff. What can I say? It's spring in Nebraska. The weather's nice. People are outside doing things. There's not much I can do about it. Anyway, so yeah, he's written some High Republic stuff, but also he's written some other things. This is Last Shot. This is possibly the funniest Star Wars novel I've ever read. This is a Han and Lando novel. I believe this was a tie-in for the Han Solo movie, which the movie wasn't super great, but this book is really good. This is a dual timeline book. So there's basically two main timelines. There's one of young Han and Lando going on an early adventure, and then there's one with older Han and Lando going on a later adventure as they're older, which is the older timeline is set again in that sort of period between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. The thing that I distinctly remember about this is that Ben, Han and Leia's son, who eventually becomes Kylo Ren, of course, is a toddler in this book, in that timeline, and he's really funny. It's written in a really funny way. So yeah, I really like this. I really like Daniel Jose Older. He's a really great writer, really great sense of humor, and yeah, definitely, again, like Claudia Gray, like any Star Wars thing that Daniel Jose Older has written is definitely worth your time. If you do want to get a little bit more into sort of the extended universe stuff, if you're starting to dip your toes into things like the Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, and some of the more recent television shows like The Mandalorian and now Ahsoka, there's definitely some books that can assist you with that. First and foremost, if you watched Ahsoka, but you haven't watched Rebels, you must watch Rebels. You must watch Rebels, right? If you liked Ahsoka, but you're not quite sure what's going on there, and you want to know more, you must watch Star Wars Rebels. That's a must. It's the thing with me in Star Wars Rebels is that I've always been a fan of Star Wars. Star Wars has been a big part of my life for pretty much my entire life. I was born 2 years after Return of the Jedi came out. My dad was a Star Wars fan. We had it on VHS tape when I was a kid. I grew up watching it. It's never not been part of my life. But I didn't really become a Star Wars fan until I watched Rebels. Rebels just pushes so many of my buttons of found family and learning together and training montages and developing relationships between characters that just trips so many of my triggers. It is my favorite Star Wars thing. It continues to be my favorite Star Wars thing ever. So when I say watch Rebels, I mean watch Rebels. It's really good. Also, if you've watched Ahsoka, you've watched Rebels, and you still want to know more, there's a bunch of books about Thrawn. This is the first Thrawn book. Again, Timothy Zahn, I know, has written books. Thrawn is a rather unique character in the Star Wars universe, in the sense that he was created as an extended universe character back in like the 90s. Timothy Zahn created Thrawn like back in the 90s, wrote several books about him that were very popular. I know this. I have not read those books, but I'm aware that they exist and that they were very popular and that lots of people like them. And then when the EU came, when Disney came around, they decided to bring Thrawn into the new canon timeline, and so they did. They brought him in as an antagonist in the last couple seasons of Star Wars Rebels, and so then Timothy Zahn was invited to write more Thrawn books in the new canon timeline. So this is the first of, there's actually 2 trilogies, so there's 6 whole novels about Thrawn in the new timeline. So this is the first one that was published. And yeah, these are more of a direct tie-in to his appearances on Star Wars Rebels. So again, it's a good idea to watch Rebels, but I think these do work pretty well on their own as well. Actually, like, the second one in this trilogy is probably my favorite of all of the Thrawn books so far. I've read all 6. This Thrawn Alliances, this is probably my favorite of all of the Thrawn books so far. This is a lot about Thrawn and his relationship with Anakin / Darth Vader. This is another dual timeline book where there's a storyline of Thrawn and Anakin during the Clone Wars, and then also there's some stuff about Thrawn and Vader in sort of the during the Empire, right? But yeah, so the first trilogy, and then the third one in this first trilogy of Thrawn books is called Thrawn Treason. And then there's a whole other trilogy that's like a prequel trilogy to this. It's called the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. That's also really good, but it gets much more into Thrawn's backstory and like where he comes from, because the blue guy with the red eyes comes from a weird place called the Ascendancy. So the Chiss Ascendancy. So yeah, Thrawn books are always a good time. Timothy Zahn is super popular for a reason. Highly recommend the Thrawn books. Another one, so yeah, Thrawn books, always worth your time. Also, my other favorite tie-in for Star Wars Rebels, if you want to know more about Hera, specifically from Ahsoka and Star Wars Rebels, this is A New Dawn by John Jackson Miller. This is, I'm pretty sure this was the very first new Disney canon Star Wars book that they published. It was published in like 2013, 2014 or something like that, right around the time that Rebels got started. So this is a direct tie-in for Star Wars Rebels. This is literally Hera and Kanan's meet cute. So this is literally the story of how they meet and the adventure that they have and their sort of budding relationship. Again, if you haven't watched Rebels, you might not know who Kanan Jarrus is. He's a Jedi, sort of ex-Jedi, and he's the father of Hera's son in the Ahsoka TV show. So this is their how they meet and the adventure that they have. I think it's really fun. A lot of people don't consider it one of their favorites, but I I think it's super fun. Again, this might just be because like Hera and Kanan are basically my two favorite Star Wars characters ever. So it might just be my bias showing, but like I think this is a super fun book. I think the characterizations are really great. And I, you know, I've read this multiple times. It's a really fun, quick, easy read. And yeah, I think it's fun. What can I say? It's one of my favorites. Another one that I really feel like I have to talk about, which also kind of involves Hera a little bit. Hera's like I said, Hera is like my favorite character in Star Wars. Hera and Kanan. So anything that involves Hera at all, I'm gonna be all over that like white on rice. And the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, not only does it involve Hera in a relatively small role, but it is actually really, really, really good trilogy of novels. So yeah, this is a trilogy of novels by Alexander Freed, who's also written some other good stuff. He writes a lot of what Alexander Freed writes is very much sort of military drama type things. He wrote a Star Wars Battlefront tie-in novel that was really good. And he also wrote the novelization of Rogue One, which is really good. Some of the Star Wars novelizations are excellent. Rogue One in particular is good. The Last Jedi novelization by Jason Fry is also really good. But yeah, Alexander Freed is very, very good at writing about trauma and traumatized soldiers. And Alphabet Squadron trilogy is fully about that. The Alphabet Squadron is, they're a squadron they're a fighter squadron, for the burgeoning New Republic in the wake of, the Battle of Endor. And they're called the Alphabet Squadron because each of them flies a different fighter. So there's an A-Wing and a B-Wing and an X-Wing. So they're the Alphabet Squadron. The second book in this trilogy is called Shadowfall, and the third is called Victory's Price. They're so good. I don't even really know what to say about them because I don't want to say much beyond, except that they're really, really, really good. If you like a good sort of military drama, fighter pilot type story, with really great characters and lots of PTSD, so much PTSD, then the Alphabet Squadron trilogy is really for you. It is excellent. I cannot recommend this trilogy enough. It's one of my favorites in the entire sort of Star Wars oeuvre. Yeah, and Alexander Freed is just a really, really good writer. He's really good at delving into the psychology of characters and really digging deep into their trauma. So yeah, definitely highly recommend these books. There's a bunch of others too. I also recently read The Princess and the Scoundrel by Beth Revis is another really good one. It's about Han and Leia's honeymoon, but it's like super adventurous. There's a lot of like mystery and fighting and stuff going on. So yeah, that's also another like fun one if you're a sort of, again, if you're sort of a original trilogy girly, you want like Han and Leia stuff, a little bit of romance, a little bit of adventure. Princess and the Scoundrel is really good. And so last but certainly not least, I cannot make a video like this without talking about the High Republic. If only because The Acolyte is coming out in about a month, and The Acolyte is going to be the first Star Wars TV show that's set in the High Republic era. Up until this point, the High Republic era has been a publishing only, it's been a publishing only situation until this point. For the past several years, they've been putting out books and comics set in this period of time, which is a few centuries before the prequel films, right? So before The Phantom Menace, a few centuries before The Phantom Menace, The Republic is at the height of its power and its glory. The Jedi are at the height of their power and influence in the galaxy. And everything is, at least on the surface, seemingly very good for everybody. You know, the galaxy is generally at peace. The Jedi are important and respected, and there's a lot of them. And the Acolyte is going to be set sort of at the end of that period of time. It's going to be, I think it's going to be, as far as I'm aware, it's going to be sort of almost like a transitional kind of thing, where we're sort of dealing with sort of the end of this this High Republic era and sort of moving into the sort of the late Republic era, which of course the prequel trilogy is sort of the end of the Republic, right? So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what they do with it. I know there's going to be at least one character, Vernesta Rowe, who is in the Acolyte, who is from the books, the High Republic books. And so now is a really good time to start getting into the High Republic if you want to. If that's something that interests you at all, it's very good. And it's a great thing because I especially like the High Republic, I think, because to some extent it is very siloed from the rest of Star Wars. So yeah, the High Republic, it's really good. And I think it is good, like, because you don't really have to know other things about Star Wars. Like, you can just sort of read the High Republic and not worry about anything else. You can just sort of read the High Republic as it is and not worry about anything else. I think there probably are a number of different places where you can start with the High Republic if you're looking to start. But frankly, I'm the kind of person that, like, I want to start with whatever was published first. I tend to want to read them in publication order. That's usually how I do things. I tend to think that publication order is going to be the best way to experience something, because, like, that's the order they were published in, so that must mean that's the intended order to read them in, right? So that's kind of how I see it. So my recommendation, if you, like, want to start reading the High Republic and you're not know where to start at the beginning, right? This is Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. This is the first book that was published in the High Republic, under the High Republic banner, so to speak. And it's really good. I think it's a really good introduction to the whole deal, right? It's a good introduction to the whole deal. It sets up a lot of stuff. It introduces you to a ton of characters, and ton of places and situations and things that are going to continue to be important as the High Republic grows and develops and goes on. So yeah, this is this is the first adult novel published in the High Republic series. And yeah, I mean, it's really good. Charles Soule is a good writer. I think he does mostly comics, but he's written a few novels, and yeah, like I said, this is a good setup. There's a lot of really great characters that this introduces you. This is the first introduction to a lot of really fun characters. The Jedi in particular are super fun. There's a lot of different Jedi with a lot of different perspectives on the universe and on the Force, especially, that the High Republic novels really do a good job with. Making these characters very unique and making their perspectives very interesting and unique and new, and things that we haven't seen before in Star Wars. They're maybe a little bit more non-traditional ways of understanding the Force, but that still work really well within the sort of Jedi worldview, so to speak. So this is a good place to start. Another really good place to start is the other Claudia Gray novel that I'm going to talk about, which is Into the Dark. This is the first YA High Republic novel that was published. And this is another really good, I think, introduction to, again, a number of characters that are going to continue to be important in the High Republic. All of the High Republic stuff is, like, all sort of interconnected with each other. The books, even the mid-grade books. I've read a couple of the High Republic mid-grade novels. The comics, they all have characters in common. They all have characters that cross between them. They're all sort of interconnected storylines. I I highly recommend, if you want to get involved in the High Republic and start reading some of the High Republic stuff, there's a number of places online, including the official Star Wars website, where you can find like recommended reading orders and stuff like that for the High Republic. I think those are really good resources. I'm following some of them as I make my way through the High Republic novels because I'm behind. The last Star Wars book I read was back in January, so I am always behind on Star Wars books, and especially with the High Republic. I just started the second phase of the High Republic, so I'm like a year or two behind on the High Republic stuff. And so I usually use, at least, at the very least, I use the suggested reading order that's on the official Star Wars website, but there's a number of other sort of places where you can find suggested reading orders that are, they might differ from each other sometimes, but yeah, so you can, it's sort of like Discworld, where it's like there's a number of different places where you can start with it, but it's really fun. I like Vernesta Rowe. I like Elzar Man. I like Avar Chris. This lady here, she's cool. I really like, yeah, Vernesta Rowe is a really fun character. She's in a lot of the YA books. I don't think she's in this one. No, this is a Reese Silas book. Reese Silas is fun too. Yeah. I'm pretty sure this is the one that introduces my favorite character in all of the High Republic, Geode, who is the coolest of the cool. I'm sure I'll put up a picture of him. Best cosplay at Star Wars Celebration 2022 was all of the Geode cosplays. Yeah, High Republic is super fun. I highly recommend it, especially if you're thinking about maybe watching The Acolyte. I would definitely start dipping your toes into High Republic stuff now, because it's going to get good. And I'm highly looking forward. I'm extremely looking forward to The Acolyte. I think it's going to be a blast. I went to a screening of The Phantom Menace on May the 4th in my local movie theater, and saw the preview of The Acolyte that they showed with that. It looks really good. Carrie-Anne Moss is... I love Carrie-Anne Moss. She's so good. She's so good in everything she's in. And I really like Leslie Headland as a showrunner. I think she's great. Russian Doll is amazing. So, like, The Acolyte is going to be bonkers good. But yeah, so that's Star Wars books. There's a lot of Star Wars books. I didn't even really scratch the surface of Star Wars books. There's a lot. There's so many. Yeah, so, if you found this helpful, let me know. If you have read any of these books and like them and want to talk about them, feel free to leave a comment. And yeah, Star Wars, everybody. And happy belated birthday to George Lucas. I believe he turned 80 this week. So, hey, good for you, man. The maker himself. Yeah, that's all I got for this video. And, so, like, subscribe, leave a comment, whatever you want to do, whatever your heart desires. Let the Force guide you, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.